Welcome to Woman Worth and Wellness, the speaker series, Women's Leadership Power with Philanthropy. So I hope you're having a wonderful day. I'm going to turn this over to Nancy here to kick us off and get us started.
Thank you, Crystal. And first of all, a huge thank you to Crystal, our gem, our virtual assistant, whose contribution is second to none for the ongoing production and promotion of our Women Worth and Wellness events. It would be very challenging without her expertise, and I appreciate every single thing that she does. A very special welcome to you today for today's Women Worth and Wellness event, focusing on women's leadership power with philanthropy. We are delighted to have special guests present from the UK, USA, and Canada, and perhaps some other locations that we may not know of. A very special thank you to our sponsor, Wealth Insurance, with whom I have partnered as a legacy advisor to accomplished women, both individuals, not-for-profit organizations, foundations, and family offices. Women's transformative philanthropy is different from men's, and gender matters. As our guests, your name and email are in our database. However, you will only be approached as we wrap up this event afterwards with a replay of the event and a request to complete and submit your feedback to us. Going forward, you'll be invited to new Women Worth and Wellness events, which you're welcome to join us for or unsubscribe at any time. Our goal is always to be professional and respectful to our guests and to add our unique value through inspiring and informative events for boomer women and their daughters. Today's focus is like the Women's Philanthropy Olympics globally. We know that the Olympics has just been launched, and I think focusing on now through to 2030, the UN's focus on sustainability, it is such a huge opportunity for women's personal leadership, making a difference with impact. Every act of generosity matters. Not-for-profit organizations are working to make the world a better place. Opportunities abound for our generosity, which enhances both our self-worth and our net worth with that absolute joy factor. Before we hear from our esteemed speakers, I would like to share two stories about women's leadership power with philanthropy. My mother is the first one that I want to profile, who was very generous, a behavior I observed as I grew up. She was wealthy in her attitude and willingly reached out to share what she knew or what she had when she could to enhance that person's joy or organization's work. She greatly admired young people who took initiative. I grew up on a farm, so we lived in the country. So some young person with a corn stand or some young entrepreneur with handmade jewelry. She was a passionate entrepreneur herself with her homemade jam business. When she died very suddenly at the age of 83 in 1990, my three siblings and I and our dad each contributed $200, totaling $1,000, for which we each received a charitable receipt, to set up the Evelyn Robertson Young Entrepreneur Award at the Dunsford Public School to award a grade 8 student who had demonstrated that initiative she admired and receive a gift of approximately $40. Not a big amount, but with a plaque. Nothing very large, but certainly an acknowledgement with special recognition to that recipient. I share this simple example as an act of philanthropy and generosity, giving back and paying it forward, reinforcing a legacy by investing in and reinforcing that quality of initiative. It would be interesting to find out how those many students since 1991, one each year, have blossomed from that initial entrepreneurial acts. That's a project for another day. The second example of women's leadership power with philanthropy pertains to Elizabeth Comper, spouse of Tony Comper, former CEO of BMO, Bank of Montreal, 1998 to 2006. I want to profile Elizabeth's leadership power pertaining to starting a whole not-for-profit called FAST, Fighting Anti-Semitism Together, which is active today, and perhaps even more so as a result of what we see going on now. Neither Elizabeth nor Tony were Jewish, but they specifically wanted to take action towards stopping hate in the community, especially amongst young people, which led to a whole awareness and learning program in schools all across Canada to this day. Tony's biography, Personal Account by Bruce Dobigan, about Tony's unique leadership, especially pertaining to women's advancement and empowerment during his career, is an event that Women Worth and Wellness hosted last June with Tony. Tony's beloved Liz passed away too soon in 2014, but her legacy and impact remain in so many ways. This is or was the incredible leadership power of Liz. To quote Tony from his book, Liz corralled me one morning as I was shaving, and after reflecting on what she'd seen on TV the night before, she said, "Tony, we've got to do something about this." Tony's response to Liz was, "I wholeheartedly agreed and promised to think about what we might be able to do to counteract these kinds of hate crimes." This insistence by Liz is one woman's leadership power that made a difference and is continuing to do so. Liz and Tony were awarded the Order of Canada for their passionate leadership. In summary, I mentioned these two examples of leadership power by women, for the world. There are many, many more examples, as you know, but these two offer such a range of philanthropy that anything is possible once we create it and make it happen by taking important action. This is what today's event is all about, how we can and why we might. Philanthropy in its simplest form is a woman's love of humanity beyond ourselves, and about being smart, inclusive, caring, generous, sharing, and investing in the future for a better tomorrow in so many worthy ways that we each care about. Everyone's philanthropy is personal and unique, as you've seen from these two examples. I'm very honored today to have these three exceptional guest speakers sharing their perspectives on this important topic. Keith, Karen, and Mark's bios have been shared with you earlier, so you can see their full and very impressive profiles. We will start with Keith, who has recently retired as Managing Director at Investor Economics. Keith is also the chair of the Masters in Philanthropy Advisory Council at Carleton, the only program of its like in Canada. Keith will share the current data on women and wealth. Over to you, Keith.
Thank you very much, Nancy, for that introduction. I thought that I would break my remarks down into two uneven but equally important sections. First, the economic picture of women in Canada, and second, the attitudes, behavior, and expectations of female philanthropists. So let's deal with the economics first. For any of us to be philanthropic, we need not only to have passion for a cause, but we need to have either income or financial assets, or preferably both. And if you're going to be a volunteer, we also need time. But let's look at the financial resources of women in Canada. At the end of 2020, annual income generated by women in Canada amounted to an estimated $663 billion. By the end of the decade, that's 2030, that number is expected to be $995 billion in annual income. This impressive growth will be the result of an overall rise in the number of women participating in the workforce, a significant increase in the number of women in managerial and professional roles, and a continuation of the rapid growth in the ranks of female entrepreneurs. And there'll also be a benefit through the transfer of wealth, which I will touch on in a few minutes. In terms of financial assets, that's assets that do not include either equity in real estate, whether it's recreational, residential, or investment, or a private business, the numbers are even more startling. At the close of 2020, financial assets managed and controlled by women were an estimated $2.1 trillion, with an expectation that that amount would rise to 4.3 trillion by 2030. And we're looking here at growth in financial assets controlled by women, that it's going to be at a higher rate than those assets controlled by men. Some of the growth that I've described reflects higher levels of income and savings, as well as the effect of positive capital markets. Additionally, and of significance, is the flow of financial assets to women resulting from interspousal transfers and intergenerational transfers. Women are expected to be the major beneficiaries of the record-breaking transfer of wealth that is set to take place over the next 2 decades as the silent generation and us older baby boomers move on to another place. Based on estimates that were published recently by Investor Economics, that the firm, as Nancy said, that I recently retired from, approximately 750 billion will be inherited by women from husbands and partners over the next decade. But not only that, intergenerational transfers from parents to daughters will likely reach $500 billion, 500 billion, over the same period. So we're looking at significant transfers of wealth. And we're talking about financial wealth. We're not talking about the transfer of real estate or equity in private companies here. And I recognize that there may be an element of double counting in that some of these assets will be passed on twice in the decade. But even taking that into consideration, it's reasonable to assume that about 40% of the growth in wealth controlled by women will be represented by the flow of inheritances. So what does all this mean to charities in Canada? First, it means that about 600,000 women in Canada will have the willingness and the financial resources that will enable them to give at least $10,000, the amount usually associated with a major gift, to a single or multiple charities in any given year. I'm not saying that they will do that. I'm just saying that they have the ability to do that. Secondly, it means that charities need to stop looking to men as donors and to women as volunteers. Charities need to begin to tailor their fundraising efforts to those that give more frequently and more generously. In other words, Canadian women. In both Canada and the United States, research tells us that within the most affluent retail segments, those where individuals are earning, say, over 100,000 a year, or where there is accumulated wealth of $500,000 or more, women, and particularly millennial women, are the primary decision makers in terms of legacy planning and charitable giving. And there's also evidence that the giving behavior of parents is more likely to be inherited by their daughters than their sons. In the remaining time, I thought I'd share with you some of the findings that have flowed from the research that I have conducted into the issue of women and philanthropy over the past 6 or 7 years. The most fundamental finding is that, as with all things associated with wealth, women and men see the world through very different lenses. And to assume that all adults at a certain level of affluence have common interests and values is both dangerous and, to some, almost insulting. For example, we know that if given a binary choice, women elect to focus on family health, not family wealth. And the opposite is true for men. Furthermore, fulfilling financial goals, aligning those goals with personal values, and participating in positive social change are more important to women than to men. Men attach a far higher degree of importance to investment performance than to financial outcomes and financial planning, and are more likely than women to be motivated to give by tax benefits associated with giving. Let me give you some more research findings. Despite being somewhat more likely than men to include a charitable bequest in their will, twice as many women as men preferred to give to charity during their lifetime than at the end of life. Female philanthropists like to see their financial gifts being put to good use during their lifetime and to establish a relationship with a charity that goes well beyond being a reliable source of funding. Somewhat disquieting for some involved in this event, it's also the case that a smaller percentage of women than men look to a financial advisor as a source of guidance in charitable giving. A recent research report by Fidelity Charitable, one of the largest foundations in the United States, put the percentage of women seeking advice from a financial advisor at 14%. Women will seek guidance from family members and specialists at charities before raising the issue with a financial professional, despite the fact that more and more financial professionals are able to deal with the development of philanthropic strategies for their clients. This is potentially a matter for concern, excuse me, given the data from a major study by Barclays, a large UK bank, indicates that women are likely to give a greater percentage of their investable assets to charities on an annual basis than men. In short, women are more likely to need advice than men in terms of a giving strategy. Before closing, it's worth noting that the global pandemic has had an impact on the attitude of both men and women towards supporting charities. And this is to the point that a third of all women and half of millennial women, those women that were born after 1980, suggest that the pandemic has made charity giving even more important in their life. The future of many Canadian charities is reliant on women, be they board directors, charity executives, fundraisers, volunteers, or donors. And I think that the more that charities understand the importance of women to their success, the better the sector will be able to secure reliable funding in the future. Nancy, thank you very much for inviting me to speak, and I'll now pass the baton back to you.
Thank you, Keith. You're a lovely gentleman, and I really appreciate you coming and sharing all of that information. One person asked if we had slides. So I think what we have to do is get Crystal to help you put that all together in a PowerPoint. So we put those numbers front and center because it is so powerful. It's something that we know. And I think to a large extent, sometimes women are scared to death of how in the world am I going to deal with this? And not every advisor that they work with has the wherewithal to help them consider all sorts of different possibilities. So, you know, your content was exceptionally powerful. And, you know, a couple of books, these are people who Karen knows, but 2 books that I've been tracking after, and again, U.S. Resources, Gender Matters, Growing Women's Philanthropy. And it doesn't happen overnight. It all takes time. But certainly having you share everything you did, Keith, was most appreciated.
Thank you.
So we'll go on to Karen. And Karen is a AAA1 rock star, the way Keith is. Karen and I first met one another in the early 1990s when she was at Women's College Hospital and I was organizing their first golf tournament. And we sort of lost track of one another, but have kept in touch over the years, primarily on LinkedIn. And most recently, Karen, after she'd moved back to the UK, University of Edinburgh, and then starting her own business, Karen and Co, or Kearney and Co. She most recently was awarded the Scottish Businesswoman of the Year award. So congrats, Karen. That is a feat, a major feat of accomplishment. And certainly you've got a lot to talk about and share with us as it pertains to women's leadership power with philanthropy. So over to you, Karen.
Thank you, Nancy, for your very generous introduction. And Keith, thank you for those insights around women's attitudes and behaviours and expectations in philanthropy. And hopefully some of the examples and experiences that I will share will kind of bring to life some of the statistics that you've just mentioned as well. Although this is a virtual event, I'm actually in Toronto this week, and it would have been wonderful to see everyone in person. I know a small thing called a pandemic, but I'm delighted to have been invited to be part of this. As Nancy highlighted at the beginning, women's philanthropy is both about a love of humanity, but also about inclusiveness, giving, caring, but also it's about role modeling as women, as female leaders, and as philanthropists. And so we've all had major role models in our lives, and I just wanted to start my remarks today by sharing some of the many wonderful women who've influenced my life as role models, and we all have them, and who've demonstrated leadership, tenacity, resilience, caring, giving, and continue to have an impact today. The first is my grandmother, who raised 10 children almost single-handedly, and while working to feed and care for them, and despite her own hardship, her door was always open to anyone who needed a helping hand, even though she could barely support her own family. My mother, who after raising the 3 children, of whom I'm one, went back to school and obtained the equivalent of her high school diploma and her business management certificate, and then went on to run as a director 2 grassroots charities in Scotland, helping women and their children in particularly disadvantaged parts of Glasgow, and to this day continues to inspire me with her drive, creativity, and her sense of humour. All us Scots have a good sense of humour, which has been needed during these past couple of years. And to the many female leaders I've worked with and for, the friends I'm surrounded by, and you know who you are, who continue to demonstrate that power of giving to others, both financially and non-financially. The Webster's definition of philanthropy is it's the practice of giving money and time to help make life better for other people. It doesn't say how much time or how much money. It's a humanitarian act and one born of kindness and caring. So when we think about women and their philanthropic journey, like me, you'll often find it has been influenced by the female role models who have shaped our thinking and our lives. So I want to start with a bit of my personal journey and how a major female philanthropist not only influenced my career, but also my thinking about engaging with donors long before I became a fundraiser. And my time spent in Canada working with female philanthropists, both at LEAF, the Women's Legal Education and Action Fund, and Women's College Hospital, as well as some of the family foundations when I was at the Toronto Community Foundation, I believe now the Toronto Foundation in name, and organisations that lead the way in funding critical issues, and the first 2 in particular for women and girls. And then I'd like to share some insights that can hopefully, as I said, bring the statistics that Keith mentioned to life of female philanthropists I work with. I advise not on their finances, but on their giving strategies and how to create the greatest impact from that. And some of the common themes that you'll see, no matter where you are in the world, what culture, although there are cultural differences in giving perhaps, But what I see is that there's no difference in the impact that women in particular are seeking to make from their philanthropy. And then how that then rolled and shaped into the ethos of Kearney and Company, and how the ethos of giving is a core value and supporting others. And so my personal journey started over 30 years ago. Where does the time go? When I literally fell into fundraising. Other people today choose it as a profession, which is wonderful, but I fell into it. And I came to Canada as a young woman at 22, and I was actually a nanny. And after working with wonderful families, I then had to look for a post-nannying job. And this will really date me, but computers were not in the workplace at the time, so I had to learn that skill. And I went to Leaf. There was a job advertised as an assistant to the fundraising director. Really didn't know about fundraising and philanthropy, what it was about, but it looked as if it was an interesting organisation, and they took a chance on a Scottish girl who'd both been a nanny and who had worked for the welfare department in Scotland. I think they thought there was a bit of resilience and tenacity in that personality. They found out very quickly, however, I was not the best personal assistant, but I did work well with the volunteers. And so they moved me into working on the Person's Day events. And as many of you will know, that was the date in 1929, where not all Canadian women, but many Canadian women, where the historic decision was made to include them as a definition of persons. And actually, when Nancy and I met, I can see the poster in the background of Nellie McClung, who was one of the famous 5 who went to the Privy Council in the UK to have women declared as persons. And the quote, "Never retreat, never explain, get the job done and let them howl," is something that has stayed with me back to those days. But it was my first interaction with a major female and self-described feminist philanthropist, Nancy Ruth Jackman, who was the chair of the board at the time. And when I came to Canada, I didn't have a formal education beyond high school. And she told me back then, kid, which she still calls me to this day, and I actually had lunch with her this week and she's still calling me kid, which I kind of quite like. She said, you need to get yourself an education. You'll be nothing without an education. And so wrote me a check for $500 and said, go get yourself an education. And at that time, through the Canadian Centre for Philanthropy, I enrolled in Ryerson's not-for-profit and fundraising management certificate. And during my time at Leaf, I came in contact with many amazing female leaders and philanthropists. And our first campaign was co-chaired by Judy Erla and Toronto's current mayor, John Tory. And it was one of the biggest campaigns that Leaf had ever embarked on back then for $5 million. And there were many women who were establishing, including Nancy Ruth, events across the country to celebrate Person's Day. And even probably today, but definitely back then, Leaf was seen very much as an unfundable charity. So we relied heavily on the support, the time, the energy and philanthropy of women who were supporting us, and men, but predominantly women. And women coming together around a cause that inspired them and which they became deeply involved, giving their time and money and their voice to advocate for change. And many of these women were trailblazers and brought together a community of like-minded women and philanthropists, the likes of Nancy and Shirley Greenberg and others. And while I was privileged to be part of Leaf then, excuse me, it's what I know today about the pride that they took in that organisation and the wish and desire to be involved in not only giving their money, but their time to make that impact. And impact's a word you will continue to hear over and over again. And when Nancy spoke about the impact of the gift done in memory of her mother, all philanthropy is making a difference and impacting someone's life. And I often think that women think it has to be in the hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars, but we can actually all make an impact with our time and with our money. And although Leaf was not an easy case to support at the time, it really did make an impact for women and girls across Canada. I also spent time at Women's College Hospital, and as Nancy touched on, there seems to be a lot of Nancys in my life. That's the other thing I'm thinking here, Nancy, who was instrumental in launching a major golf tournament that supported much of the critical health and research that was needed around women's health at that time. And so the power of female leadership around fundraising has been there from a very early stage in my career. And as Keith touched on in his remarks, women and men see the world through very different lenses. So therefore, assuming that they approach their philanthropy in the same way can often be, as he said, quite dangerous and sometimes insulting when engaging with them. I had the pleasure recently of interviewing a major female philanthropist in the UK just 2 weeks ago, Helen, about a significant gift that she'd made to a university, and to a university that she had no connection to, that she never went to, and neither did her children. And her first engagement was not with the leadership of the university, but it was actually with the students graduating from the university, because she runs a number of care homes in the area. And many of them were coming in to do some of their nursing education within the care home. And what she said was that she suddenly realized that she was part of a community that was bigger than her and bigger than the business that she ran, and one that was connected through the university. And she went on to make a significant gift that enhances their programs in nursing and midwifery. And one thing that struck me in our conversations is that she was quite emphatic about it was only the beginning of a relationship. So again, we hear time and time again, women becoming involved in causes and they stick with them and they stay with them. Nancy's still involved in LEAF over 30 years ago. They stick with it for a long time. And she was very complimentary as to how the university had managed the relationship. And it was the language that she used. And she said, they've taken the time to get to know me and my family. It's as if they know us and what's important to us and our values. And that really struck me when I was speaking to her, because it came across so strongly and so passionately. And it may sound like such a simple thing to do, and we could assume that charitable organizations are all doing this when engaging with their donors, but it was the time that they took. And I think the other word is they did it authentically. They really got to know who she was. So I asked Nancy Ruth when I met her this week, what is it that drives your philanthropy? And she spoke about it being aligned to her values and people taking the time to truly understand what they are and not to assume. And I think she said they often assume, because of the organizations I'm involved in, that that's the only area that I support. But actually, she has other things that are core to her values that she supports as well. And the other thing that struck me in speaking with Helen in the UK was that she's engaging her family around philanthropy. And again, to Keith's point about the family influence, it's very much an important factor when engaging with female philanthropists. And I'm on the board of a major philanthropist foundation in the UK, Anne, who's also part of the Giving Pledge. And for those of you who are not aware, the Giving Pledge is a group of philanthropists, men and women across the world, who've pledged to give away the majority of their wealth in their lifetime. And Anne is one of those major philanthropists. And I'm a trustee in her board that's supporting women's health in Africa. And in speaking with Anne about what drives her philanthropic engagement, it's all about, and she said, meaningful impact for those who would otherwise not be supported. So she's really looking at a marginalized community in Africa around women's maternal health and well-being, where there is no one else supporting what she's doing. And again, she has made it part of her legacy in her family foundation as well. I also had the pleasure of working with her as a donor to the university that I worked with in Scotland, and it was a gift she gave of £1 million. And it was a sizable gift for us at that time. And the Vice Chancellor at the university, Dame Joan Stringer, used to say you could give £1 million to Oxford or Cambridge or Harvard or MIT and it would make a difference. But you give £1 million to an organisation like Edinburgh Napier University, who's not receiving gifts at that level, and they'll work very hard to ensure that the donor intent is carried out and the greatest impact is achieved. And Anne gave us £1 million to establish a programme called Leadership in Compassionate Care in Nursing. She was a nurse herself by profession. So again, her values were aligned from what she had learned through her profession and the role models that had impacted her life. And she felt the nursing profession was losing what she'd been taught as a nurse. And that was the ability to care, not to medically care, but to emotionally care for patients. And so aligned with the hospitals in Scotland, as well as with the university, we created a programme that went from teaching to practice. not unlike the teaching hospitals here in Toronto and the engagement with the universities and the allied health charities. It was about bringing others together into this philanthropist impact, because we could not deliver it all on our own. And I think that that's also something that female philanthropists want to see. They want to see innovation and creativity and how we can solve the problem together. And so charities can be quite protective of their donors and of the work that they are doing. But I think that we can sometimes create greater impact if we come together. And the thing that struck me about Anne compared to other donors I'd worked with, excuse me, at this level, was not only her involvement, but the level of reporting. And I don't mean creating massive reports just for the sake of it. She took her investment in us seriously, and she wanted us to do the same back to her by demonstrating the impact it was having. And she also wanted to speak to the patients, and she wanted to speak to the nurses who were on the program. And she really wanted to understand the impact it was having on everyone. Drink of water. So we all know donor stewardship is important, but it really is understanding what motivates donors, and in particular, what motivates female donors. And we know from the research and experience, it's about that level of engagement, involvement, and that takes time. Not only time to build a relationship, as Nancy said earlier, but the time around the involvement. And we need to be very mindful of that. Nancy had mentioned Kathleen Lower's book on Gender Matters, A Guide to Growing Women's Philanthropy. There we go. Have a copy myself. And so I wanted to share some of Kathleen's insights, because I know Nancy had hoped that she would have been here today, and she's done a lot of research in this area. And one of the statements she makes is that we need to take the time to discover what we know, but what we need to know. So there's things we know, but there's still things that we need to know. And how often have we come back from a conference or even today's talk excited about something we've learned and we fail to change or to take the action that's necessary? And I guess I view that as moving from fundraising or philanthropy that's transactional to fundraising and philanthropy that is transformational. And that takes time to do that. Kathleen highlights one organization who interviewed their female stakeholders about approaching them for a gift and what was important to them. And one of the most resounding and compelling reasons is they want to support an organization where they have a true belief in their mission and in their reputation. They must know about and see the need before they will make any gift. An extremely tangible need, and they want to understand that word again, impact. And then they want opportunities for active engagement. So this is not about just putting someone on a volunteer committee like Anne's engagement with us around leadership and compassionate care. She would turn up at the hospital without us even knowing it. She just wanted to see how the nurses were actually getting on. And this is not just lip service to their gifts, it's about genuine involvement. And I also work with families in Asia and support giving for one family where the head of the family is also a woman, and they're strong supporters of education across the globe. And many years ago, they supported scholarships at the university I was working at. But however, since then, and in their words, Karen and Kearney & Company have become a permanent fixture in our family's life. And we've built a relationship of trust with them and advise on their giving across the globe, including Australia, the UK, North America, and in Asia. And I often talk to our clients about not just being an organization that fundraises, but being a fundraising organization, and one that builds a culture of philanthropy. And a culture of philanthropy being not just the job of the fundraiser, but as part of the ethos and values of the organization. And that's something that women are also looking for. If an organization hopes to achieve greater engagement and philanthropic impact from women, their philanthropy, it has to be central to the strategy of building that culture of engagement. It's not an add-on the way sometimes fundraising can be seen in some organizations. And Kathleen also highlights that in almost every program, women gravitate to activities that allow them to connect meaningfully to each other, the beneficiaries, and the organization. So there's also that connection of other women who perhaps might be involved in the organization as well. And she also highlights celebration. This is not about a plaque or a name on a wall, it's about celebrating success along the way. And it's not just when the gift is made, it's actually through the process. And celebrating the engagement with female philanthropists about any new information that's achieved, about celebrating that success, about the discussions, about how you begin to move the dial in the right direction that you want to go. However, a key factor is all of this engagement doesn't happen without focus and resource and establishing an infrastructure that can actually support this. So if we take all of the research and information we've heard today about how women give, and we apply it to either our organizations or as philanthropists ourselves, what results will we achieve? And they'll be different for each person, but you will achieve increased philanthropy from men and women. It's when we reach out to women, you reach men too. Deeper relationships with donors and volunteer expertise, creative new engagement programs, diversity and networks, and so much more. And the impact in society is, first, we would perhaps no longer be talking about women's philanthropy. There would be equal representation of women in our not-for-profits, our university board tables. Secondly, we'd be raising more money. The trillions of dollars that Keith touched on earlier, if even women contributed 1% of that, it would have a huge impact on the organizations that need support. And frankly, our society continues to need more support. And it was the last point around society needing support was something that was important to me when I established my company 5 years ago. As I said, I've been in the business of fundraising for 30 years, and my career started by someone believing in me and giving to me. And I've shared my journey with them and the impact that it's had in my life. I went on in 2011 to achieve my MBA, my first in my family to do so, and then 5 years ago set up Kearney & Company. The company values is each year we give 10% of our operating profit back in time, as well as contribute to the charities that are important to us. We also give personally, locally, and the team within Kearney & Company also give. And so each year, each team member within the company designates a charity that they want to support, and the company makes a gift on their behalf. One of the areas I support is a school in our local area in Glasgow, and it's located in one of the most economically and socially deprived areas in Glasgow. And I remember speaking with the head teacher about what we could do for the school. We were making a contribution, but it was around the holiday season. Could we bring gifts for the kids or sweets or something that would put a smile on their face? And she said, Karen, they don't even have warm clothes or boots. And I then realized that this was a partnership between me and the charity. And I also had to listen to their needs and not always impress upon them what I thought was best. So although female philanthropists want to be actively involved and engaged, that healthy debate and that healthy understanding of where the needs are and bringing together the institutional needs with the donors' needs is always where I say the magic happens in the middle. One other area that we've supported was a very good friend of mine who was the first female vice president of advancement at University College London, Laurie Houlihan, who suddenly at the prime of her career was struck down with a brain tumor and sadly passed away last year. However, when she was going through treatment and dealing with everything that goes along with a life-limiting illness, she set up a fund to support the critical research into the type of brain tumor that she had. And we continue to give to that, and it grows. So a common theme today is the power of women coming together to deliver impact, whether it be through their voices and actions or through their philanthropy, and should never be underestimated. I've had the privilege of knowing some phenomenal women and have been influenced by so many women in my life. I hope that I can pass that on to those in my company, as well as to our clients. And as Nancy said, last year I was recognised as Scottish Businesswoman of the Year, and it was around our personal ethos in giving that was one of the key factors in the success of that. And I've had a strong foundation of women throughout my life, from my grandmother to my mother, to Nancy Ruth Jackman, supporting the growth of my career and instilling an ethos of giving back. And I'll just finish because I love a good quote, and I'll leave you with this African proverb, which I love, which is, if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. Thanks, Nancy.
Thank you, my dear Karen. That is excellent. Really, really good. And of course, I feel even more at home because I was a Robertson before I was a Griffin. And when we went to Scotland, we had a great time. We had a super time. So delighted that you went back home, but then you're also available to come back to Canada and share all your expertise, which is fabulous, especially when it's so globally, it's personally focused, but it's globally focused as well, which is terrific. And I've found with women in philanthropy, women want to be generous, but often they don't know how. And it's the same old story. If you don't know, you're often nervous to ask because you're frightened you might be sold something you don't want to buy. So then you just retreat and you don't step forward. And the whole topic of philanthropy does have many complexities. It's complex in terms of what do you value? What organizations do you want to support? And how was the best way to do it today and going forward? One of the other guest speakers that we'd hoped to have was Sandy Trelliving, who was in a blended family, 3 generations. She's come up with a great approach. She has started a women's mental health awareness program at CAMH. And so as the 3 generations, they decide where they want to direct their dollars. So, you know, these are guest speakers that we'll have in the future because the role modeling really, really makes a huge difference in helping people understand what they might think about doing. So thanks again, Karen. That is excellent.
Karen, they've asked you to give the quote again one more time. Could you say it again, please?
I can. The quote is, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together.
Beautiful.
Okay, terrific. So we're in good time, which is excellent, which will give us more time at the end for some questions. But next on the agenda is Mark Halpern from wealthinsurance.com. And how I got to know Mark was through Moses and Eimer's Ideas Conference, which he hosted every year in person up until the last 2 years when it wasn't possible. But Moses, being the great entrepreneur he is, he made available previous year's programs for your viewing pleasure. And Mark did a TED Talk. And as a wealth advisor, you're expected to know a lot. You're expected to know not just a lot, you're expected to know everything. So when it comes to philanthropy, there are all sorts of different approaches for people who are super wealthy and people who want to make a very modest contribution. And what impressed me about Mark was he came up with some different creative approaches that can use dollars so efficiently. The government of Canada wants you to be philanthropic because there are many tax savings to be had. And it's knowing how best to access those tax savings that will give you the greatest return on your net worth. And of course, I always say your self-worth, because when we give, we feel great about it. So I'm going to turn it over to Mark. I'm working with Mark as a legacy advisor to accomplished women. And what that simply means is I'm prepared to work with Mark for having the conversation on how we can maximize your philanthropy. So Mark, show us how some possibilities can happen.
Thank you so much, Nancy, and thank you for organizing this. I will say about Nancy that she has tremendous passion when it comes to women and wealth and philanthropy, and it's been great connecting together, and hopefully we can do a lot of great things to help people. I just wanted to say that it's been a very, very busy past 2 years for our organization, probably the busiest in the last 30 years, in the sense that people are much more aware of their mortality than ever before. And as a result, also there were incompletions. It could be just estate planning incompletions, wills, structures, etc. But one area is in the area of legacy. People have been giving sort of, randomly without a lot of strategy behind it. And they've gone from success, but they haven't gone to significance. And I think that comes with a lot of planning. And I want to share with you today what I think is really important. And just tell you, I'm on the board at Sick Kids and St. Joe's and St. Michael's Hospital and TV Ontario. We just did a presentation to the board of directors of a large hospital foundation. At the very end, the president said the following thing, and he's a layperson. He said, Mark, I'm a reasonably successful person and I'm a reasonably intelligent person, But I have to tell you, I probably only knew about 5% of all the things you talked about today. How come I don't know those things? And how come our donors don't know about these things? And that's really what I want to share with you today, that there is a lot of really great nuances or ways for you to convert taxes into charity, create legacies for your families, and do a lot of good. So that's really the objective for today. And I don't want to sort of give you to drink through a fire hose. So we're going to give you a lot of information, but hopefully we'll also have a great opportunity to follow up on this. So I'm just going to share my screen right now. And then something just happened here. Here we go. Share screen. And please tell me, Nancy, everybody can see that? Nancy, you can see that?
We can see that. Yep.
I can.
Beautiful. Good, fantastic. So again, anything we speak about, please talk to your professionals. We collaborate with professionals all the time to make sure that things really do fit in with your overall planning. Now, a lot of change has happened in Ottawa, although we have an old new government. Apparently, they recognize the fact that things are becoming more complex for us. So they're going to be introducing now a one-page simplified tax return with only one question going forward. How much did you make? Send it to us. Now, we joke around and, it seems like tongue in cheek, but the reality is things are changing. Today's reality is we know taxes are going up. That's not a question of if, it's a question of when. You can see capital gains taxes going up to 75%, wealth tax, inheritance tax. We got to come up with money to pay for the situation we've been in the last couple of years and with the debt. The other reality is that a lot of people have done investing, but they haven't done planning. Planning is a very different approach where it comes to looking at preserving what you have, maximizing your income, and being tax efficient. And we'll see why that's so important. We've also gone from an information age to what I call a misinformation age. People are going online for information. And I think it's really incumbent that each situation is very bespoke and people need to build a team around to have different visuals or different perspectives on your particular planning. And you've heard of Freedom 55, right? Well, Freedom 55 today is when your youngest child is 55. Now, we say that jokingly, but it's true. Their kids are getting out of school. Where are they finding jobs? They've got debts, loans, finding real estate in the city. It's just not possible. So we have to look at how we're going to be helping them further going on. But the good news is that people are looking for more meaning in their life. They're willing to actually, a lot of the millennials in particular, are willing to pay more than retail if there's a social responsible component to it. So that's really the good news. And just to give you an idea of things you're going to see out there, if you haven't heard about willpower, you certainly will be hearing about it. But this is an initiative that was launched by the Canadian Association of Gift Planners this past September, but it actually started in the UK over 10 years ago, where the statistics were that of all people who had wills, only 5% had actually left a gift in their will to charity. So they went on an initiative of gathering money from all the nonprofits, and they bought retail advertising with a very simple message: leave a gift in your will. And the number went from 5% of people leaving gifts to 9%, which represents $50 billion of new charity in the UK. In Canada, the goal is to create $40 billion. And it's really not about disinheriting your children. It's about adopting charity and disinheriting the tax department. And that's what I really want to speak to you about. Now, I mentioned I started in the business 30 years ago, but my real start was actually in 1974. And that's when my father, of blessed memory, died of a massive heart attack at the age of 50. I was 11 at the time, was the youngest of 4 boys. And my mother, who was 48 at the time, had to go back to work to support her family. The reason that she had to do that is my father was a busy engineer and there was no will, there was very little savings, and there was no life insurance. Fast forward, I work with some of Canada's most wealthy business owners and entrepreneurs and sporting personalities and wealthy families, and you'd think they'd have everything all organized and together. But I'd suggest 8% of the time it's not true. They're so busy looking after everything and everyone else that they don't have all their ducks in line. So we look at things from 3 perspectives. We look at estate planning, which is really making sure that your financial architecture and the furniture you started with actually looks the same today. And if not, how do we go ahead and replace things or update things? The second area we're involved with is in tax minimization strategies, often using tax-exempt insurance to preserve estates. And the third area is philanthropy. How can we help people create legacies for their families, often by converting taxes to charity? And that's really what we're going to talk about today. And it's really about looking at the big picture. Everybody has to look at the big picture when it comes to their planning. This is not about a transaction or finding some sort of neat strategy or sale. And we look at things from 30,000 feet up. And eventually we always talk about charitable plan giving. And the reason we talk about charitable plan giving is because people do have control over the legacy that they want to have. Most of our clients, just to give you an idea, have sort of passed through that period of time in their life that unless they were to invest all their money in a penny stock or start spending frivolously, chances are they're going to have more money when they die than what they have today. So they're really sitting there as the custodian or trustee for the next generation. But what they don't realize is that they're partnering with the tax department on that money. So it's really important to do a plan to sort of figure out, we're going to be fine in retirement. Here's the tax at life expectancy. Here's some never spend money that we have that we're just paying taxes on. Can we use that to preserve our estate for our family or for charity or for both? And the reason why I'm bringing this up is people don't even know how much taxes are payable. Yes, we have income taxes every year, but there's actually taxes on assets when we dispose of them, and taxes that are going to be exposed upon death. And this is just a basket of some. In Ontario, here are the numbers. RSPs, risks, pensions are going to be 4% unless you have a spouse to roll them over to. Any growth in real estate investment, not your principal residence or a business or appreciated securities, there's a 27% tax on the gains. Corporate holdings can be anywhere from a state administrative tax of 1.5%. So you can have a lot of money, but realize it's not as much. So I met with a lovely 80-year-old widow recently who had a $10 million net worth, and she'd done very well in terms of investing that all on her own. And I said, Sandra, you're not worth 10 million. You're actually only worth 6.5 million. She was obviously not too happy to hear that from me and was actually quite annoyed until I explained to her that her $4 million RIF was going to be half. And there was $1 million of capital gains taxes from her non-registered portfolio. So it's really important to look at this stuff while the sun is shining to make sure that you can be as efficient as possible. And it really starts with all of us realizing that we all have three possible beneficiaries to our estate. We have family, we have the tax department, and we've got charity. And each of us can only pick two. Which two would you pick? Most people would take family and charity. And with proper planning, you can be remembered for leaving a large amount of money to a charity as opposed to writing a big check to the tax department. But again, it comes through planning. And this is my favorite quote, which is, we need taxes. We have an amazing country, and it requires a tax system to fund all of our social services. And we have to pay taxes, but there's no law that says that you have to leave a tip. And that's really what we're talking about. So what do? We actually create what are known as accidental philanthropists. And what I mean by that, there are two kinds of people. One person just has the DNA or the education. They love to give. They're giving people. It's just part of their family heritage, their upbringing. And then there are those people who don't, for whatever reason, they didn't get the same education. Once those people realize that they have a choice where their taxes go and they can give them to charity, suddenly those people become accidental philanthropists. And those people who are already giving can give more for the same amount that they were willing to pay, or give the same amount for less cost. So we want to find those accidental philanthropists. And where is this most prevalent? I have a very large practice made up of widows, divorcees, and singles. These are men and women. But unfortunately, the statistics are that it's mostly men who die sooner than women. So they are really holding on to a lot of the wealth of a family, and they're only one incentive away from a very large tax disposition. So they have to know about that. And we'll talk about those with some case studies. Anybody that you know who's sold or will be selling a business or investment real estate or appreciated securities, that's the year they make the most amount of money. It's also their biggest year of paying taxes, but it also means it's the biggest year that they can use charity to mitigate those taxes. Anybody who's done an estate freeze or will be doing an estate freeze, they can donate private company shares. We'll talk about that shortly. Or if you have taxes due every April, why not take some of your non-registered securities and donate those? 27% of the gains don't even belong to you. You don't pay taxes on those donations, and you get a charitable receipt to offset your taxes in April. If you have a foundation or a donor advised fund, great way to leverage that. If you have an existing life insurance policy you no longer need, great thing you can do. If you have an estate tax bill on death, we can show you how to eliminate that estate tax bill. Or if you've left a gift or bequest in your will, there are ways to leverage that even more. And it's simple math. Let's just keep it simple. For every $2 you donate to charity, you save $1 of tax. So if you have a $1,000 tax bill and you give $2,000, $1,000 of tax now becomes $2,000 of charity. Receipts can be used each year to offset up to 75% of your annual tax payable. Any amounts over the 75% can be carried forward for up to 5 years. And here's something that most people don't realize. At death, receipts can be used to offset 100% of estate taxes, 100%, and you can go back the prior year as well. So that's something to really consider when it comes to estate planning. We're going to look at some gifting options. A gift in a will is also known as a bequest, an RSP or RIF beneficiary, gifting securities, and also gifting life insurance. And the first one is just considering gifting in a will. So change the will, include charity with a specific amount or a percentage of your estate to charity or charities or to a donor advised fund. Remember, $2 to charity, same as $1 of tax. If you don't want to go through the trouble of changing your will, why not just go ahead and notify your financial institution that is holding onto your RSP and RIF, and you can order what's known as a multiple charitable beneficiary form to include a charity for a percentage or a dollar amount of your registered money to charity. Why did I mention RSPs and RIFs? Because they are the biggest tax time bomb in Canada, and people don't even give them a lot of thought. And the people who have to be most concerned are widows, divorcees, and singles. Why? Because if you have a spouse and you die, everything goes over to your spouse tax-free. It's not until the second to die the taxes are due. But if you're single, you're 1 instant away from a big disposition. And it's so not unusual for me to meet clients all the time that have a $2 million RIF or a $2 million RSP. The first thing they have to realize is that it's only worth $920,000 to their beneficiaries. So we have strategies to leave the full $2 million to family and still include charity, or get the money to charity and get money back to your family. Again, it comes down to planning. Most people in Canada give right now cash, checks, or credit cards. And I want to tell you, it's the most cost and tax inefficient way to give. And if you're involved with charities, I know this sounds crazy, don't accept cash, checks, and credit cards. Tell people that there's a more efficient way. And that is something that was introduced by the government back in 1997 that said, instead of donating $50,000 of cash in this particular example, where you need to make $100,000 pay taxes to have 50 to donate to save 25,000, somebody has $50,000 in shares with a cost base of 10,000. So there's a $40,000 gain. If they were to sell those stock, they would pay taxes of $10,800. So really that stock is not worth 50,000. It's worth under $40,000. But if you donate those stocks in kind to charity, you pay no capital gains taxes, and you get a charitable receipt for the full $50,000. That saves you $25,000 of tax. That's why at the end of your strategy, it's a great idea to look at how much taxes you're going to be paying in April, how much non-registered stock do you have. Let's either give it to charity now, or we'll just park it in a donor advised fund, and at least we'll distribute it down the road. An even better way of giving, which is really, people don't realize, is if you have a corporation, an investment company, a holding company, and you've got corporate securities. Instead, consider that same situation of $50,000 in shares with a cost base of $10,000. Not only do you get a deduction for the company by donating $50,000, which reduces the company's tax value, but the government allows you to take the capital gain of $40,000, and it gets credited to something called the capital dividend account and can now be withdrawn from the corporation tax-free. That would be like you saving $20,000 of tax versus you pulling the $40,000 out and paying $20,000 of tax. So I have a number of clients, many women as well, who have large portfolios who donate them to charity, allows them to take money out of the company and get some big deductions. And then they use life insurance to fund that money that they donated to charity such that it goes back to the family. And they do that for pennies on the dollar. It's a beautiful way of structuring things. We don't have a lot of what we call tax shelters left in Canada. There are really only 4 left, other than your principal residence, which they're now looking at possibly taxing, TFSAs, which are limited to $6,000 a year, lottery winnings, which are taxable in the US, so don't buy your tickets there. Buy them here in Canada, where you don't pay taxes. And the last one is tax-exempt life insurance. Other than these 4, any other assets that you have, there's somebody from the CRA that you love that has their hand out that would like to participate in your good fortune. other than these four. So it's important for us to understand how these can help you with your philanthropic goals, especially around tax-exempt life insurance. And all donations are not the same. We have to appreciate. Here's an example of somebody who wants to give away $1 million to charity, either using cash, public company shares with a zero cost base, so think of a cannabis stock or something like that, flow-through shares, which we'll talk about, and a life insurance policy. Giving cash costs about 50 cents on the dollar. Giving shares only costs about 23 cents on the dollar. Using a flow-through share, depending on what jurisdiction you live and what products are available, can cost you anywhere from 5 to 15 cents per dollar. And the life insurance policy can only cost you 12 cents per dollar. So not all donations are the same. So it's important to figure out what it is that you want to do and accomplish, and then look at what's the most efficient way to do it. So one of those things I mentioned was gifting life insurance. So one thing you can do is donate an existing life insurance policy. Many of our clients have old policies that they bought when their kids were young and they had mortgages and education funds to pay still. And it's not unusual to have these policies sitting around. You can actually take that policy, get a charitable receipt for the fair market value, and donate it to charity and be recognized for a large gift. And going forward, the donation, the charitable or the premiums that you pay would be considered charitable donations, which would save you taxes. I do this all the time. I just did this with a fellow who's in his 60s. Actually, it was a woman. She was actually 68. She had a $300,000 policy. She donated to charity. She got an $87,000 charitable receipt that saves her $40,000 a year, or $40,000 a year, and she gets recognized for giving $300,000 to charity. So, in some charities, depending on the policy in your health, will actually consider paying the premiums going forward. We do a lot of that on the board at Sick Kids Hospital. That's a big part of a waste for us to create money. And just bringing that to your attention, there's a lot of people who have term life insurance that most of the time they cancel it, becomes too expensive, but they don't need it. But you can actually convert that term insurance to a permanent policy with no medical evidence, and then get a valuation and donate it to charity to save taxes and make a beautiful philanthropic gift. So don't let those term policies fall off the books. Another alternative is donating a new life insurance policy. So let's say somebody has $1 million tax bill as an estate tax. Why not consider getting a $2 million policy, donating that to charity, and now the $1 million becomes $1 million of charity. Again, you're using pennies for dollars in order to create that policy. Or lastly, if you just have a policy right now, a current insurance policy, why not just change the beneficiary to a certain percentage or a dollar amount to your favorite charity? Again, $2 to charity, $1 of saving of tax. And this is just an example here of somebody, again, just to see the power of insurance. On the left side, that's just somebody investing $100,000 a year for 15 years, or putting away $1.5 million in their company, earning 4% per year. And then at age 30 years later, that amount would be worth about $2.3 million to their family. On the right side, we use corporate insurance, the same $100,000 a year, but we have to buy an insurance policy for $2.574 million. We put away the same $1.5 million, but after year 30, it's now worth $4 million. So we created almost $2 million more money, either for charity, for family, or for charity, or for both. So it's one of those things that definitely should deserve some attention. And here's a big secret. Life insurance can be owned and paid for by a private foundation or a donor-advised fund. Most people are not aware of that. That means if you have money sitting already after tax, charitable dollars, sitting in a foundation, you can use that money to fund and buy and have a policy owned by the charity as the beneficiary. An amazing way to create transformational charity, as we'll see. Other giving strategies, a lot of people think when it comes to life insurance that the benefit is only when you die. But in fact, we do a lot of work where insurance actually provides a benefit while you're alive. There's components of a life insurance policy called the cash surrender value. If that policy is owned by a charity, then that's a line of credit for the charity to use. Or the policy can produce something called dividends. Those dividends can be paid out to charity every year. We have some of these in place for hospitals and universities that are substantial for clients. The last one, though, I think is the most important, is something called Cpp Philanthropy. This is something we came up with back in 2017. And that is, in Canada, once you turn 65, you start receiving Cpp. For most wealthy people, they kind of giggle, I'm a pensioner. But it works out to about $26,000 a year for a husband and wife. Most people get it, they pay taxes on it, they reinvest it, and then they get taxed again. If you're philanthropic, you could take that $26,000 and acquire about a $1.5 million life insurance policy. If that policy is owned by your charity, then the $26,000 is considered a charitable donation. You paid no taxes on your CPP, and you just created $1.5 million gift. Or alternatively, take the CPP, pay taxes on it, get the policy for $1.5 million, and donate it on death. So the $1.5 million goes to charity to save your estate $750,000 of tax. The third approach is take the CPP, pay taxes on it, get an insurance policy of $1.5 million, have your children be the beneficiary of that, and donate that $2 million RIF to charity. Remember, it was only worth $920. Now they're getting $2 million, and your family's getting $150 or $1.5 million versus $920. Or I also believe in charity begins at home. If you're a grandparent, take the money, take the $1.5 million, and make your grandchildren the beneficiary. They can have a fund in place earning 5% per year to generate $75,000 a year in perpetuity for your grandchildren. Again, that CPP ends when you do. So it's just a great way of converting it into something more special for your family. Here are just some case studies, and then we'll wrap up. We had a family that sold some real estate, investment real estate, for $120 million. And they had a $20 million tax bill. And they were asked whether they'd be interested in doing something philanthropic to mitigate that tax. So they got introduced to us. We took $40 million of the $120 million and set up a private foundation. That means the $20 million of tax now becomes $40 million of charity. But the family's out of pocket $40 million. They still have $80 million, so it's not so bad. But we use life insurance and a financing strategy to get the $40 million back into the hands of the second and third generation. So it's just a timing issue in order to make them whole, but they're going to be whole. But the net result was turning $20 million of tax into a $40 million charitable foundation, and to actually get money back to the family down the road. A great idea. If you've done an estate freeze, we had a family where they had an estate freeze done at $28 million with a $7 million tax that would be attached to that. And they were asked whether they'd be philanthropic, and they were. So what we did was we took that $7 million of tax, we turned it into only a $500,000 tax. We created a $14 million donation to charity using the private shares and some insurance. And the icing on the cake was the family also had a $6 million tax-free capital dividend for the next generation. The cost of doing all of that, again, using a financing arrangement and insurance, was just under $2 million. So for just under $2 million, they did all of that versus writing a check for $7 million to the government. And then RSP or RIF assets, we have a lot of people who are sitting there with money that they don't really need when they see it's only worth half. So you can actually donate your RSP or RIF today to a charity, have no withholding taxes at source, and the tax would be 53.5% on the withdrawal, but there's a 50% credit on the charitable donation. So 3.5%, you now have a charitable foundation set up, as opposed to a half of that amount of money for your heirs, all part of planning. Last couple of things, we see there are 5 givers out there. Some people want to be completely anonymous. Others want to set an example for others to follow in their place. Others want to be remembered by having a name someplace or on a charity university. Others do it just for tax benefits. But others do it because they know it's great for business. Being philanthropic is great for business. And we have many cases where people have been able to give $1 million, multi-million-dollar gifts to charities for pennies. And they get recognized as if they actually gave that check today for $1 million. But in fact, it was worth only much less. And the charities today are definitely recognizing legacy plan gifts much more than a realized gift. So certainly keep it in mind. Just to end off, if I asked everybody on this call, and this is part of my discussion with people, do you know the names of your grandparents? Most people would say yes, they do. But if you ask, do you know the names of your great-grandparents? There are far less people who know that. This is actually a picture of my great-grandparents, Aaron and Liba Gross, back in 1934 in Poland. Unfortunately, they were killed in the Holocaust in 1941. But imagine if on January the 1st, you received an envelope in the mail and there was a check for $10,000 from your great-grandmother. Do you think you'd remember her name? So with proper planning, you could actually be remembered that way. And they say, you know, that you live once and die twice. Dying once, I understand, we stop breathing, but dying twice is when people stop talking about you, people stop mentioning your name. With proper planning, especially introducing philanthropy into your family's planning, it's a way to pass along your values to your children. And more than ever before, you know, with social media and just families being so different, we want to give that message to our children and even more so to our grandchildren. So with philanthropy and doing things strategically, it's a great way to get them involved and be able to show how important it is for you to take social responsibility for the world and to make it a different and better place. Next steps, I have something called the 48-hour rule. If any of these ideas resonated with you, then please do something about it within 48 hours. Otherwise, we kind of forget it and get busy. Speak to Nancy Griffin. I don't know who Nancy C is, but she certainly can help you with you and your family and with your professionals as well. Please connect with me on LinkedIn. I post a lot about charitable endeavors and structures that we're doing. We also have a tax letter digest of over 100 articles and one-pagers that actually outline those concepts that we talked about earlier. Learn about it and don't ignore it. There's just too much writing on the line. And consider your own legacy gift. High level, here's $1 million insurance gift for an individual, for a single person, male and female, where it would be limited pay. They're paying into this for 10 years only. Those are the after-tax costs to create $1 million gift. Now, if you're a husband and wife and you had a joint policy, those prices, those after-tax costs could come down by up to 40%. What it comes down to is doing the planning. And I just wanted to just finish off. We have a corporate goal of wanting to create $100 million of new charity every year, working with our clients, with charities and foundations, and also working and collaborating with allied professionals. We've done over $60 million each for the last 2 years, and we would really like to increase that much, much more. So it's a great opportunity. The question is you have to take care of this clearly while the sun is shining. And the sun is shining now, it leaves us with a lot more options. And when it's not shining, we have less options and we have to pay those bills. So I hope this was of interest. And I hope that you'll do something about it. And please reach out to your professional advisor, reach out to Nancy, or reach out to us, and we'd be happy to help.
Thanks, Mark. And for our guests, one of the reasons why I agreed to work with Mark is I know this whole area is very, very complex and everybody's situation is different. And you can see that he just ran through all the info that he knows exceptionally well, that most of us don't know very well. And each one of us has a personal scenario that we want to address. So that's why I volunteered to kind of be the front person to help work it through. I think this is a lot of the work that Karen does as well to, you know, you've got expertise in approaches that you can take, but at the end of the day, you have to have empathy and patience and understanding to work with that individual. Okay, Crystal's got a couple of copies or a couple of questions. So before we run out of time, Crystal, can you present your questions?
Yeah, and somebody just asked to put up the last slide. And just so you know, at the end, we are going to send a replay of the presentation, and it'll have the contact information of the speakers should you wish to reach out to them. And just a few accolades first. Thank you so much to our speakers. Joanne said, Keith is always the most interesting stats and love the positive outlook. And Annie, very inspirational presentation. Karen, thank you. And thank you, Mark, very informative. And Rowena says, thank you for your gift to the profession, everybody. And great presentation. Fun for me. I was Leafs DOD for 3 years and also worked with Nancy. And that's from Catherine. So thank you to those comments. Keith, we have a question for you. The pandemic has taken a disproportionate impact on women and their participation in the workforce. And what impact do you see the past years having on these estimates?
Thank you for that question. A lot of the estimates that I talked about are based on the fact that high income earners and high asset owners actually control the bulk of wealth in Canada. And that is true for men and is true for women too. So the actual impact of the pandemic on the availability of financial resources to give to charity has not changed significantly. The women that have been impacted by the pandemic are in fact lower income and women with fewer financial assets. So the actual impact is not as significant as we might think. And I would also say that those estimates were pulled together in 2021. That information was published in July, August of 2021, so that we had gone through almost a year of the pandemic at the time that those estimates were made. And we reflected on the impact on the economy of the pandemic at the time. And I mean, it's worth saying too that if you look at capital markets, there's in fact, at least until recently, been a fairly significant upward trend and inflation in the value of financial assets. So great question. The impact is not as significant as we might think at first glance.
Great, thank you, Keith. Somebody had asked to put up the book titles. We did put it in the chat. The title again, Nancy, could you say that again? The book titles you were referencing.
Gender Matters, A Guide to Growing Women's Philanthropy. Kathleen Lohr. I did put it in there, and I am in touch with Kathleen. She too is on LinkedIn. So by all means, reach out, and she's posting lots of really, really powerful comments, lots of good information. And the other book was The Transformative Power of Women's Philanthropy. And that was the summary that we sent to you when you registered. Some of the information was in there. So all excellent resources. And we have a feedback sheet that we normally have not taken feedback on these events, but this time we are, at the encouragement of Phil and Mark Halpern. And we really want to know what else you'd like to know, because again, you know, there's a lot of information that's been shared, and how do you bring it down and make it personal for you? Somebody once said that the world needs more Canada. I can't remember who made that quote, but what I'm advocating, as you can well tell, is that the world needs more women's leadership power with philanthropy, at, you know, on a small basis and on a large basis. Any more questions, Crystal?
I do. This one is for Karen. Karen, oh, just have lost it. I know Karen briefly mentioned the importance of diversity. As a panel, how do you take into consideration the needs and struggles of WOC in philanthropy?
Is that from those who are giving or from those who are receiving? Or I can give my view from philanthropists and a woman of color who's a big philanthropist to one of the trusts that I sit on. And I guess it goes back to some of the themes that I was mentioning. I can't speak from an engagement around financial matters, but what we have found is not dissimilar to others, that she's giving to a cause that is close to her heart and aligns to her values. And so engagement with her has been very much around an area that's important to her, similar with other philanthropists. And what she's also doing is role modeling that behavior herself. So I guess the broad answer is, if there's more women of color who are giving or participating in boards or engaging with their networks, then there's going to be more role models over time who will begin to grow and be part of that journey as well.
Okay, anybody else? Keith or Mark on diversity?
Just to say that there's a lot of work being done by academics around the issue of a lack of representation of people of color on boards and at executive levels in charities. So I think it is an issue that's been recognized, and work is underway in that area. In fact, some is being done at Carleton University, where I'm associated.
Excellent. Mark, any comment?
No, I think everybody, I think the two other panelists spoke about it very nicely.
Okay, Crystal, any other comments or questions?
Nope, I think the rest of it was covered. So back to you, Nancy.
Okay, well, our worst nightmare is that we'll run out of time. So we've just won the lottery. This is amazing. But I will just say thank you to all our guest speakers. Everybody was exceptional. And I think one certainly complemented the other. The whole topic of philanthropy is definitely a continuum. And Keith is the one who shared the stats in terms of where the opportunity is. I mean, women's ability to be where we've always supposed to have been is now emerging as a huge, huge, huge opportunity. So you can tell that I really want women to step up to it and find out, reach out to whomever, reach out to me, Keith, Karen, Mark, anyone, or your advisors that you're currently working with to tell you more about philanthropy and what things you might be thinking about. I really appreciate you, Karen, making time available. Our plan was to be in person. And I had planned to be in Toronto. That didn't happen. So hopefully when you come back again, we'll have an in-person event. And Mark, I know you know this stuff inside out and it goes so quickly. But I know that you've got individual solutions that you can help people with. And that's exactly what I want people to connect with you on. At the end of this session, you'll be sent a replay. You'll also be sent the feedback sheet again. Our next event is on International Women's Day, and it's the actual date of March the 8th at 4:30. And referencing Nellie McClung, she's one of the famous five. There is a famous five foundation that was started by a lady in Calgary, Frances, and monthly she hosts events on different women's leadership topics. So I've asked her if she would be a guest speaker. But there's one person on our guest today that I referred to as a Renaissance woman. And what I meant by a Renaissance woman is anybody who's working, running a family, running a business, I feel is a Renaissance woman, somebody who's doing 5 things well all at the same time. So I thought it would be a great topic as we think about coming out of COVID, that once again, there's an opportunity for women to be strong and to really reach out and be the best that they possibly can be. I think the year of the tiger is courage, confidence, and I've forgotten the third thing. So that event on International Women's Day will be talking about the famous 5 and the courage they had to have to do what they did in their day. And I've also got a terrific resource who will talk about the Renaissance and the plague that they experienced and the creativity that came out of that period of time. So again, that will probably have to be an hour and a half rather than an hour, but mark your calendars, International Women's Day, March the 8th at 4:30, and you'll be sent an invite and we hope you'll join us. So I think that's it. Crystal, anything else you want to add on?
That is it. We'll send the replay. And again, I've popped in the link to the survey in the chat. We would really appreciate your feedback of the event today. All questions are optional, and just the more information we have, the better that we can be to give you the best events and the best information. So it only helps us. Thank you very much. Replays will be sent out here within the next 24 to 48 hours. We appreciate you all being here today.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Crystal.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Nancy.
everyone.
Thank you, Keith. Thanks, Karen. Thanks,
Happy
Crystal.
motoring, safe travels. Thank you again, everyone.